Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a video on the top 10 builds in Diablo 4 Season 5. The Mother's Blessing event just kicked off. There's a 35% XP bonus for the next few days. Now's a great time to start leveling up a bunch of characters. If you haven't tried Season 5 yet, now's a great time to jump in. If you have been playing Season 5, now's a great time to try out a new class. And here are my 10 picks for the best builds across all 5 classes. And coming in at number 10, we have our first sorcerer build on the list, the Fireball Sorcerer. Now, when we saw the patch notes and we saw the devs talking about this build, I was hyped for it. I wanted to try out the Fireball Sorcerer. And if you play in Season 5, I'm sure you've seen a Fireball Sorcerer out in the wild at some point from your screen filling up with a bunch of fireballs. It is a really fun build. It is not the strongest sorcerer build. However, it's really great at open overworld content. It can even do very well in the new mode, the Infernal Hordes. It's just amazing at AoE damage. It's also a really spammy build. It's not difficult to play. You never run out of mana, even though you're spamming Fireball, because we have a few tools in our kit to manage our mana. This build's weakness is single target, however. And it also doesn't scale as well as some of the other builds on this list as we go into higher and higher tier content where monsters have more and more and more life. But again, for what the vast majority of people do in this game right now, at least, this build can destroy it. As the name suggests, this build is all about Fireball. Not only is it the one skill you are spamming, you are also taking the Fireball enchantment. That makes it that when you defeat an enemy, they erupt in another fireball. So it's fireballs upon fireballs upon fireballs. We're using the Gloves of the Illuminator unique item in this build. This makes you gain mana when Fireball explodes. This helps solve our mana issues. And it makes it that when Fireball travels, it bounces, exploding each time it bounces on the ground. That's how you have these bouncing balls everywhere. You'll want to combine these gloves with the Staff of Endless Rage. That's going to double cast your Fireball for more fireballs, and makes every third cast of Fireball launch 2 additional fireballs. Definitely a fun build to try. So moving on to number 9, we have another sorcerer build, the Chain Lightning Sorcerer. Now this is just a great all-around build. If you're leveling a sorcerer, especially 50 plus, going from 50 to 100, you don't have all your items together yet, Chain Lightning is a solid option, but as you do get the gear for it, this build comes online even more. This is a better all-arounder than Fireball. It's better at tackling all the content in the game. It doesn't have that same weakness against single target that Fireball has. So it's going to scale better. It'll take you further into higher and more challenging content. However, to run this at its full power, you need the item, the Axial Conduit Pants. And this turns the playstyle into something that not everyone is going to find fun. It's a little challenging. It's basically playing this mana management minigame. With the Axial Conduit, your Chain Lightning alternates between orbiting you and seeking up to 3 enemies. When it returns to you, it drains 6 mana from you for each active Chain Lightning. So you have to pay attention. How many Chain Lightnings do I have out? After draining a set amount of mana, it explodes for a bunch of lightning damage. This is a very clunky mechanic. It's difficult to play around. You can't just spam it. It's one of the higher skill builds in the game. It's one of the higher skill builds in the game to play to its max potential. You're punished for just spamming Chain Lightning and not managing it. If you run out of mana, it's bad. It's just bad. So if you're looking for a brainless build, this is not it. But if you are up for a challenge, if you're up for something a little bit more mindful, where you're going to be rewarded for good play, then check out Chain Lightning. All right, on to number 8. The only barbarian build that we're going to have on our list here, and it is the Flay Barbarian. Overall, barbarians did not turn out to rise this season. We always predict, oh, someone's going to come, Rob's going to come and save barbs. Didn't happen this season. In fact, Bash even ended up underperforming, so we're left with a Flay Barb. And really, where Flay shines is against single target. Flay Barb is a bleed build. It's not going to be as fast as these other builds. It's not going to be able to clear screens of enemies quite as easily. But what it does really well is take down bosses. Not that it can't do any AoE, but just the nature of the bleeds, it's going to deal us damage a little slower. But if you want to put a build together to like tackle the tormented bosses, for instance, this is a solid option here. Its single target damage scales really well into higher tier content. There's a lot of uniques that we can work into this build. The Fields of Crimson, pretty important as it gives us a bunch more damage to bleeding enemies. You can work in the Rage of Haragith, which is gonna make inflicting bleeds reduce your cooldowns. That can help you stay in Wrath of the Berserker form more. It can help you pop your shouts more, it can help you leap more if you're going with the kind of more speed-oriented leap version of the build. I should stress, however, this is a late game build. It takes a lot to get this build going and properly set up. This isn't a build you're going to start running at level 50. You're going to want to have everything together, all the gear set up before you transition to it. Another item you're going to want to use is the Shard of Varathiel. This is one of the new uniques, and it makes our generators, our basic skills, deal a ton more damage, but it makes them consume resource. This build also benefits a lot from Mythics. Barbarian has a ton of equipment slots, so you can fit in a lot more items in general. And as a Barbarian, overall, the Flay Barb looks like your best opportunity to really shine in a party. That takes us to number 7, the only Necromancer build on our list here, the Bone Spirit Necromancer. And it's going to be a similar story to the Barbarian here, where this is an excellent single target build especially, though it does handle AoE better than the Flay Barb. If you want to do possibly more damage in one hit than any other build in the game, this Bone Spirit build, this is all about setting up the biggest possible nuke you can land. This build can hit for billions of damage. Now, the only issue with Bone Spirit is that it deals this damage in a very small area, which is why we're reliant on corpse tendrils to first scoop in our enemies to bring them into a small area and then release the nuke on them. This is an overpower build. You're going to want to use the Banished Lord's Talisman. That changes the overpower mechanic from something that happens randomly a small amount of time to something that you can deterministically trigger and buffs your overpower damage. And this build is also very reliant on stacking a ton of crit chance to basically ensure you're critting all the time. Overall, this build is more challenging to gear and much more challenging to play than a minion necromancer. But if you do it and you do it well, it's gonna pay off. Again, if you want to just delete tormented bosses, Bone Spirit, excellent option. Now on to number 6, we have our first rogue build, the Rapid Fire Rogue. Rapid Fire Rogue is a great all-around build for the rogue, but it does specialize in single target especially. It uses the Scoundrel's Kiss unique item to turn Rapid Fire into a skill that lobs exploding arrows, making it a bit more of an AoE skill. Rogues in general are a class that are a little harder to play than other classes, and this certainly isn't one of their easier builds to play. Your positioning is going to be important a lot in general with rogues, and this is also a combo points build. Combo points is a rogue specialization where you build up 3 combo points, or ideally you want to build up 3 combo points before popping a spender. You build up the combo points with a generator, then you pop your spender to spend your combo points to maximize your damage. So it's this kind of rhythm game. You need to kind of be paying attention to how many combo points you have and not use rapid fire when you're not full stack. We work in the combination dagger. This makes skills deal even more damage when you're spending 3 combo points, but it thankfully also gives your basic skills a 50% chance to instantly give you 3 combo points, which is good in one way, bad in another, because without these, you know it's the cadence of 1, 2, 3, pop, 1, 2, 3, pop. Now you have to pay even more attention because it could be 1 pop, 1 pop, 1, 2 pop, 1, 2, 3 pop. But again, when played well, this build rocks. That takes us to number 5, another rogue build, the Barrage Rogue. And I know this is going to be unpopular putting the Barrage Rogue ahead of the Rapid Fire Rogue. They're really, really close in power, okay? Barrage is really versatile, and it's great for building up to the absolute best rogue builds. Yes, this isn't even the best rogue build. This build is a lot of fun. I vastly prefer the playstyle of Barrage to Rapid Fire, but that's kind of a your mileage may vary sort of thing. I know others feel differently. Similar to Rapid Fire, it's another combo point build, and there's actually a lot of overlap in gear between these two builds, so it's very easy to swap between Rapid Fire and Barrage, maybe depending on what items you find. If you find a really good item for the Barrage build, you can swap to that. This build is significantly easier to play than Rapid Fire. The positioning, we're still using combo points, but the positioning and the ability to just have your arrows shoot everywhere without having to aim so precisely makes this build significantly easier. It's also better at speed farming, but Rapid Fire is better at single target. So if you care more about bossing, Rapid Fire might be better, but if you aren't so concerned with bossing, then Barrage, in my opinion, is the slightly better pick over Rapid Fire. But that takes us to number 4, the rogue build that beats both of them, the Heartseeker Rogue. I ran Heartseeker in Season 4, that was the final rogue build that I ran, and I loved it, and then it was nerfed through a bug fix in Season 5, and we thought Heartseeker was dead, but Heartseeker rises again thanks to new interactions, thanks to a new unique item, the Shard of Varathiel. It's a unique focusing on basic attacks. We mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the Flay Barb, but it turns Heartseeker from a generator into a spender. Now, this is a very late game build. You're going to need to have a lot of gear requirements before you can swap to Heartseeker. Otherwise, you're going to just run out of resource constantly and not be able to do anything. So I suggest either Barrage or Rapid Fire until you have the gear needed to run this build. You need to have solved your resource issues before swapping to this build. And one of the things that you need to fix that is the mythic unique, the Ring of Starless Skies. That by itself won't solve your resource issues, but it'll be a huge contribution to doing so. Outside of that, you're going to want to temper the Innervation passive onto your rings and amulet. Overall, though, I think this has once again risen to being my favorite rogue build. It's a lot of fun. It's also pretty easy to play, so very difficult to gear for, but easier to play than probably any other rogue build. That takes us to number 3, the only druid build on this list, the Landslide Druid. This build does huge AoE damage. You're shooting out landslides, and lightning bolts are just coming down, deleting everybody. Now, while it's called a landslide build, landslide is really just a delivery system for lightning storm. That's where all our damage is coming from, lightning storm. And we don't even keep lightning storm on our skill bar, we're just activating it via landslide. There's a few interactions going on here. Nature's Fury key passive. Casting an earth skill has a chance to trigger a free storm skill, and these free skills count as both storm and earth skills. We're using the newly buffed Earthbreaker unique ring. Casts of landslide leave behind tectonic spikes that continue to deal damage. Spawning a landslide pillar within tectonic spikes has a chance to spawn 2 instead. More landslides, more lightning storms. And we're using the unsung Ascetics wraps. Lightning storm gains 1 additional strike each time it grows. Lightning storm crits cause lightning to strike twice and deal increased damage. So just tons of spamming of lightning storm. It's great. There's also lots of synergistic bonuses to shapeshifting. To really get going, this build does need a few uniques, but this is an excellent all-rounder for the druid. It can do all content in the game, and it's particularly great at speed farming infernal hordes. All right, on to build number 2, the best rogue build. Yeah, that wasn't even the best. The best rogue build in Season 5, the Andariel Rogue. Now, some may even say this is actually the best build in the game, not my number 1 choice. It's definitely the strongest in that it can do the most damage consistently. It does, however, require an Andariel's Visage Mythic. It's not optional. You cannot run this build without it, because this build is all about triggering the poison attack of the Andariel's Visage Mythic. You're also going to need a good amount of lucky hit chance on your gear in order to trigger Andes as much as possible. Now, Barrage, for instance, transitions really well into the Andariel Rogue. You're going to want to use some other build to farm up what you need for Andes. We're going to work in a Fists of Fate unique item for its massive lucky hit chance. This is an up-close, basically melee playstyle. You're technically a ranged build, but you're going to be playing real up close with the enemies here. You're using Barrage as a vehicle, Barrage with Poison Imbue as a vehicle to trigger the Andes Poison Nova. Overall, this build has very steep requirements. Its playstyle's a little tricky. You do big staggers against bosses, but overall, again, it's a little trickier to play, at least in Heartseeker. And by their nature, rogue builds in general are trickier to play than most other classes. But if you get all the requirements going, you get the playstyle right, again, arguably the biggest damage in the game here. The reason we're not giving this build the number 1 spot is because of its difficulty in building it and playing it. Again, very steep requirements, but some people will say this is the best build in the game, which takes us to our number 1, which many of you have guessed by now, the Lightning Spear Sorcerer. Sure, maybe Andy Rogue is technically stronger on paper, but for the vast majority of players, Lightning Spear will perform better than any build in the game. It's easier to put together, although you still have a gearing journey, right? You're gonna experience the build growing as you get your gear, closer and closer to perfected stats. And once it's there, once it's near a certain threshold, it just absolutely destroys everything in the game very easily. It's almost a brainless build. You can basically just be spamming all your buttons. It's super easy to play. You don't need any mythic uniques. It's tons of fun. You don't even have to aim at enemies. You can close your eyes and spam your buttons and finish infernal hordes. For the average player, this is the best build in the game right now, by a mile. In fact, I'm expecting it to be nerfed in Season 6. While this build is technically a lightning spear build, we're actually not putting more than 1 point into lightning spear because we're not scaling our own damage. We're using an aspect, and that aspect deals its own fixed amount of damage that scales based on our crit damage. So this build is about stacking a bunch of crit chance and crit damage to maximize our damage output. The only thing you really need to get this build going is the Fractured Winterglass Amulet. You can swap to it as soon as you get a Fractured Winterglass with at least a 0.2 roll, and you can masterwork it to a 0.3 roll. You really want a 0.3 roll to get it going. And we're talking about the affix, conjuration cooldowns are reduced by 0.3 seconds when a frozen orb explodes. Lightning Spear is a conjuration, so basically you're spamming Frozen Orb just to reset the big cooldown on your Lightning Spear to be able to launch more Lightning Spears. Cooldown reduction in general, very important for this build. At lower gearing, this build is only going to be able to spawn Lightning Spears every few seconds, but every several seconds rather. But once you're really going, you are hitting Lightning Spear, you know, maybe once every second or so. The Fractured Winterglass also makes Frozen Orb have a chance to launch other conjurations at the end, so you can get into the cycle of self-sustaining where you shoot Frozen Orbs, they shoot their own Lightning Spears out. And then it also makes your conjurations have a chance to launch Frozen Orbs when they end. So you can literally end up chaining Frozen Orb, Lightning Spear, Frozen Orb, Lightning Spear, Frozen Orb, Lightning Spear. Now I'll wrap up this video by discussing how does this track with our tier list video. We gave a class tier list video. We put Rogue in S tier. And as predicted, the Rogue features heavily in our top 10 list. It has more builds. 4 out of 10 builds on this list are Rogue builds. Rogue is still S tier. I had put Sorcerer in A tier. I stand by that. Sorcerer is carried hard by Lightning Spear. We do have 3 Sorcerer builds on this list, but Fireball, Chain Lightning, those are way down. Those Rogue builds are much higher up on this list. So I do believe overall Rogue squeezes out the Sorcerer. If you were to nerf Lightning Spear or take away its power, no one would say Sorcerer is stronger than Rogue. Then I had put Druid in B tier. I stand by that. It's carried hard by landslide. It is its best performing build. It's the only Druid build on this list. I had put Necro in C tier. Again, we just have 1 Necro build on this list. It's very niche, at least relative to other builds, right? It's not an all-rounder. Bone Spear specializes in single target. The only thing I would revise from the tier list is the Barbarian. I had him in A tier. I think I'm going to bump him down to C tier. Again, Bash didn't perform as well as expected. Flay is really the only thing saving the Barb, and it is also quite niche like the Necro. But those are all my picks, folks. I turn the question to you. What are your top builds? Sound off in the comments. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my supporters. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo content.